Good morning to all my friends and family, and welcome to this episode of Jim's 5am Club. It's Thursday morning. It's the day before my 62nd birthday, and it's the day before Vivid Sydney kicks off on Friday night on the 27th of May and goes all the way through to the 10th of June. So for 2 weeks, Sydney will be alive and probably the most beautiful place in the world, with all the lights shimmering across this harbour, with all the monuments like the Opera House, the Harbour Bridge, the Museum of Contemporary Art, you name it. There'll be a light. There'll be a light show, mesmerising all of those who happen to make it into the city. Given that a couple of years have passed since COVID, I imagine that there are going to be thousands and thousands of people descending on the city. And I remember last time, a couple of years ago, that the traffic was horrendous. So plan your time, come in with public transport and be part of this magnificent Vivid Sydney 2022. Anyway, let's kick off and do a book summary like we normally do. And today's book summary is a really interesting one. It's one that I thoroughly enjoyed reading on the bus coming in, and as you can see, I've taken quite a few notes, and it's one of those topics that I absolutely love. It's a topic of communication with children, and the book is entitled How to Talk to Children, and how to get children to listen to you. And it's written by a dual authorship of Adele Faber and Elaine Mazlish, and they offer a number of morsels of tips for all of those who are going to be parents, for those who are parents, and for people like me who are grandparents and are still learning, because you can never learn enough when it comes to the art of parenting and communication. And this book covers a full spectrum of techniques that one can use, one can incorporate, and hopefully one can leverage to bring out the best in the children that we have under our care, and the children who will one day become tomorrow's leaders and will become parents themselves and will be able to influence future generations. My spiritual father always tells me that having children, being married, is a salvific act, because what it does is that it allows you to feel, and it teaches you a lot more about yourself, and it teaches you God's love, how to love unconditionally, or to try and learn how to love unconditionally, even though what the child or what your children are doing are annoying, is potentially disappointing. Sometimes you need to be patient, you need to stand back, and you need to spend more time listening to them and not completing their sentences, and allowing them to grow and develop and to find their way, because each person has a unique life. We're all going to have a different past. We're all going to experience a different present. I am here, you are there, you are somewhere else. and we're most certainly going to experience a different future. So we need to understand that we're all different from each other, but we're different from each other for each other. And that's the way God has made us, in order to fit in together, to collaborate, to cooperate, to compare and contrast. You know, life is a flow. Life is an ebb and flow, a give and take. And eventually, the great point, the great message that comes from this book is that eventually all children, all people will find their way, regardless of how they stumble, regardless of how they meander and the challenges that they face in life. All children at some point will find their way and end up, as my spiritual father says, may end up becoming better Christians, better citizens than what you think you are yourself. So the key message that comes from this book is not to give up, and to spend more time listening and helping your child, your grandchild, anyone in your care, to help them grow and develop, and to learn through their mistakes, learn through their challenges, rather than to tell them all the time what to do, because by telling them all the time what to do is, in a way, making them dependent on you all the time. And when people become dependent all the time, they end up becoming junkies, and they don't think about what they do, they don't think of the consequences, they just expect somebody to tell them all the time what to do, and that in itself is a recipe for disaster. So the first point to come from this book, from this dual authorship, is that the only way to get through to a child is to first acknowledge their feelings. As parents, as adults, we need to listen to them rather than expect them to listen to us. It's a profound point, that, because some people just can't help themselves. They feel as if by being a parent, their job is to be the commander-in-chief and to give orders and to expect their wives, their children, their peers, their work peers, and everybody around them to drop everything and to follow them and to follow their commands. But the great leaders are the ones who empower those around them and get them life fit and match fit by listening to them, by focusing on them, by understanding them, what their needs are, what their desires are, what their strengths and weaknesses are, and helping each person in a unique and focused way to find their way, to find their calling, to express themselves and to make the most of God's gifts that they have. So what the author goes on to say, and this is very profound, this is very powerful. He says that a child's behaviour is linked to how they feel. A child's behaviour is linked to how they feel. And I guess most of us, even as adults, we behave as a reflection of how we feel, which is important to understand and to appreciate. So feelings for young people are massive drivers of how they behave. So given that a child's behaviour is driven by how they feel, the key message, the key learning that comes from this book, from this dual authorship, is that we need to spend more time listening, actively listening to our children, to our grandchildren, and to those around us. Because the first thing that we need to do is we need to show them. We need to show them that we're listening, because that in itself is enough to disarm somebody from behaviour which is antisocial and disappointing. So listen actively, listening rather than telling is the first message that comes from this book. The author then goes on, or the authors then go on to say that it's important not to threaten, not to command, or not to be sarcastic to children, and to create, where possible, an atmosphere of respect and understanding. And as we said before, to try and live and try and express God's unconditional love. Of course, it's easier said than done. I can sit here and talk about it. The authors can sit there and write about it. But to be able to be patient and to express unconditional love to those around you, even when they don't deserve it, is really challenging and really difficult for most people. But the authors basically tell us and guarantee us that if we take this message on board and incorporate it into our parenting style, then that sooner or later the fruits of our trust, the fruits of our actions, the fruits of our listening will appear, and will appear manifold. So the author here tells us that when you're with children, when you're with your children, your grandchildren, with other children, one of the key messages and the key learnings is that you need to spend some time talking to them, listening to them first, and then talking to them, but in a loving way. And you need to explain firstly what the problem is so that they can understand. So if they're staying up late, if they're not going to bed, then it may be feasible to explain to them. And it sounds simplistic, but the authors here suggest that it is effective, that you explain to them that if they stay up late and don't sleep at the time that they normally sleep, then they may end up being tired, and once you become tired, then you don't have the energy to focus at school the next day, and your performance will be impacted, and there are other first, second and third level consequences which, as a young child, they probably can't see, they probably can't understand, because the mind of a child, the brain of a child is not fully developed to be able to understand the consequences of their action. And science informs us that people usually need to get to the age of about 30 before the brain is fully developed and able to foresee the consequences of one's actions, and to make better choices and better decisions. So the author here has a call to action for us to help them figure it out, and to enable them to understand that we're on their side, and what we're trying to do is we're trying to help them do things that are good for them. The other important message to come from this book, which a lot of people may find controversial, is that what you shouldn't do is you shouldn't punish a child, because by punishing a child, you're creating an enemy for life. You're creating an environment for them to distrust you, to see you as an enemy, not to see you as a collaborator, a partner in their growth and development. And what we need to do as parents is not to command, not to push, not to punish, but to try and find a middle ground, try and help compromise the situation, because by doing so, we're teaching the child how to negotiate effectively so that they're not pushed around, but they can find solutions to their many problems. And every person is going to have multiple challenges in their lifetime, because as we say, God's gifts come wrapped in problems. God's gifts come wrapped in suffering and pain. But it's up to each and every one of us to try and find meaning in that pain, in that suffering, and to learn from a very young age, if possible, how to deal with those challenges and issues and make the most of each and every opportunity, each and every problem, and to understand that the rainbow, the sunrise, will always follow the darkness or the storm. So what happens is when you punish a child, science informs us that when you punish or when you fight with anybody, what it does is it forces people to flip back into their reptilian state. Their basic brain kicks in, and it's a fight, flight, or freeze response. It's an instinctive response which kicks in and lasts for up to about half an hour. So once you anger a child, once you anger anybody, then you can't have a rational discussion with them because they can't think straight. Their body is flooded with adrenaline, with cortisol, with stress hormones, and that causes certain parts of the brain and certain parts of the body to shut down to protect them. So they're in survival mode. And when you're in survival mode, your instinct is to either fight, flight, or freeze. And when you're in that state, when that cocktail of hormones is surging through your body, you can't think straight and you can't make responsible and empowering decisions. You're just going to do things in spite of the situation, which will make things worse for you and for others around you. So what the authors here say is one thing that you can do to help a child is to keep them calm, to do whatever you need to do to keep them calm, and to brainstorm solutions, brainstorm options, be an option thinker, be an option creator, give them choices, but allow them to understand that each of those choices will lead them to a better outcome than what their anger or their angry response will generate. So as we say, most people, most children will eventually find their way. But as a parent, our job is to get them life fit, to get them match fit, to get them ready to take on their individual challenges. Because as we said, we're all going to have a different past, a different present, and a different future. My life, my problems, my challenges are going to be very different to yours. And they're going to come at different stages, at different phases of my life. And at some point, there may be challenges that'll come as a tsunami, where a lot of problems hit you at the same time. So what you want is for your child to be match fit, and able to deal with those problems rather than to suffer and to be overwhelmed with those problems. So what we're saying here is from a very young age, we need to let children act it out and discover what life's all about, and to know that they will find their way. And of course, it's not easy. It's not easy watching them grow and develop and making mistakes along the way. But sometimes we just need to step back and let them tie their own laces. Let them learn through pain and suffering and disappointment how to deal with their problems. And don't make them dependent on us. We don't want to have our children to be junkies. For a dependent child feels worthless, feels dumb, and feels useless. So every time you finish a sentence for your child, every time you do something for your child, what you're basically doing is you're reminding them how dependent they are, how worthless they are, how dumb they are, and how potentially useless they are. So you're not helping them in a positive way in the long term. So we need to be mindful of that and to understand that all of our actions can empower or they can disempower. So the most important thing as a parent is to get our children, our future leaders, match fit as early as possible. I remember when I was a kid, I remember when I was 10 years old, I knew a lot more than what my parents gave me credit for. You know, they'd talk about things and they thought that I didn't understand or didn't know what they were talking about, but I knew very, very well what they were talking about. So you too, your children, your grandchildren, they know what you're talking about. They know what the issues are. They can sense what the problems are. So you're better off sharing the challenges, sharing your vulnerabilities with them for them to understand that it's okay to have issues. We need to encourage them to autonomy. Let them make choices on when to do their homework and when to play, and not to lose hope. And as we said before, to welcome the opportunity for children to make their choices. You know, to let them know that there is playtime and there is homework time, and it's up to them to decide when it is, but they must do their homework. You know, by all means, they can play before they do their homework, or they can play after they do their homework, but they've got to do their homework. So it's up to them to decide when to do it and to make sure it gets done. Because we need to teach our children that for every choice comes a first, second, and third level consequence, which they probably don't see or they can't see because their brains are not developed enough. But to be able to trust the process so that they get on with life and they become life fit and they don't become victims or problems of life. The author goes on to say that it's important to praise children, to offer them praise, but to never label them. Because what happens is that by praising children, you improve and you generate and you facilitate self-esteem. And when we praise children, we shouldn't praise them with a hint of past weaknesses. We don't want to remind children all the time about their past weaknesses. We want to try and help build them, help them grow. And the important thing that the author says here is that we must steer clear of labeling behaviours, because what happens is, just like when a person goes into prison, they basically are defined as a criminal. And once you have a label, once you are defined in a certain way, you tend to spend your time acting out that label, acting out that definition that others have placed you in. So be careful not to label children, not to label their behaviours, and not to label yourself as a good or as a bossy parent or so-and-so. Because people use labels to justify their behaviours. There are people who use, the signs, like I'm a Gemini, for example. People will use those signs to try and define and justify their behaviours. But any label that you have can be can defeat you and can lead you to behaviours which are disempowering, I guess, is the point that I'm trying to make. Because as we said before, people adopt their behaviours and their labels, and they become convinced of their labels. So be careful of the negative labels. And of course, giving people a positive or an empowering label is probably the best way to go, but steer clear of the negative, defeatist labels. So the last points to come out of this book summary is that you need to show your feelings and to value a child's opinion. Learn to pause and not to complete their sentences. Let them say what they want to say. Let them share what they actually feel. Because by sharing, you're learning what's troubling them. You're learning what's driving them. You're getting a better understanding of who they are, and by verbalizing, they're getting better at understanding and expressing who they are. So we need to pause and not complete their sentences and just listen. Just close your gob, zip your mouth, and listen to what your child is saying, or what your child is trying to say is the key point which is coming from this book. And it's up to us as adults, it's up to each and every one of us as an adult to be partners in their growth and development, and to create an environment, to create an atmosphere of growth and development, a safety net to enable them to express themselves, to get match fit, and to become the best version they can of themselves, and to be the best, and to love their childhood. There's nothing better to look back over your life and to have said to yourself and to say to yourself that you had a magical childhood. And it's up to the parents, up to the family, the siblings, the uncles, the grandparents to prove to the children that they are worthy, and to help them along the way through a thing called endless love and unconditional love. And there you go there. So from Friday onwards, we're going to have the message there of endless love coming up to remind the people of Sydney, this beautiful town, this beautiful city, that it's all about love, unconditional love and endless love, which is what God is, an expression, a full expression of love, and to understand that we too are called to action to express God's unconditional love, and to know that even though we're all unworthy, God's love for everybody is the same, is unique. Anyway, as you can see, the sun is coming up. It's going to be a beautiful day. I'm sure that this cloud is going to blow away and to burn off. And wishing everybody a happy Thursday. Thank you very much for joining me on this episode of Jim's 5am Club on the day before my 62nd birthday. And I look forward to celebrating tomorrow and having a good weekend. Take care, good health to everybody. Most importantly of all is that we all have good health, and to see out the last few years of our lives as best we possibly can, knowing very well that time is flying. I just absolutely can't believe that 2022 is almost halfway there. You know, we're almost into 2023. Anyway, take care, lots of love, and we'll chat again. Bye for now.